stood on the bridge and asked passersby for money, telling everyone that I had cockroaches under my skin and that I urgently needed treatment. Passersby were easily sold on my fake blisters, but suddenly a strange woman in a dark raincoat grabbed my arm. I was pathetically making a learned speech about blisters, but she picked one off with her fingernail and glared at me. I tried to pull away, but she grabbed my arm with her claws and said with a hoarse voice that I was a liar and I would be damned. She blew some powder into my face from the palm of her hand, and when I rubbed my eyes, she was nowhere to be found. The next morning, I woke up with an itch on my neck. I began to scratch it, and suddenly, it seemed to me that something crawled under the skin. But I immediately dismissed these thoughts. I probably got too used to the role. I used to work as an actress in the theater, but it brought a penny. But I figured out how to use my acting talent, and now I was a top-notch con artist. Even though my mother always taught me to be honest, it made me angry. She was sick, and we couldn't even afford the doctor. I tried to save her, but in the end, she died right in my arms. The doctors only tried to get more money. They didn't care. At that moment, I was completely disappointed in people. Our house was taken away for debt, and after that, I decided that from this day on, I would treat people the same way they treated me and my mother. I would deceive them, and soon I would take all their dishonest money, which they loved so much. This would be my revenge for my mother's death. Thinking about it, I quickly packed up and headed for the hospital. There were always a lot of compassionate relatives, and I could always collect a good jackpot from it. But I didn't even stand outside the hospital for 5 minutes. The body itched terribly, and there was a feeling that someone was crawling under the skin. Terrified, I ran into the hospital. Help me, there's something moving under my skin. Patients parted, and some nurse said that with such problems, I needed to pay for an appointment with a skin doctor. I immediately put the money on the reception desk. The look in her eyes said, "Where did a beggar get so much money?" The tests took half a day, but in the end, the doctor said I was fine. Are you kidding me? I immediately got up and left the office, slamming the door behind me. I could feel something crawling under my skin, like it was eating me from the inside out. I couldn't work anymore, so I went home. I was hoping that if I got some sleep, it would go away. But just as I lay on my back, it was like I was burned. I jumped up and looked in the mirror. My back was all red. What's going on? And suddenly I remembered yesterday's gloomy woman. What if she really put a curse on me? I ran to the bridge where I begged and searched for the witch for several hours without success. I wanted her to take it all back. When I was exhausted, I decided to take a break in a cafe, and as soon as I went in, I saw the same woman behind the counter. She sipped her coffee calmly. "Well, I'm going to get you." I started to demand that she take back her curse, but the old woman coldly ordered me to sit down. "I'm the hereditary witch Graham, and you've got yourself in trouble. In a week, the cockroaches under your skin will eat you," she said. What was I supposed to do now? Then the witch added that of course, she could help me, but in exchange, I had to do everything she said for 3 days. I was indignant. No way! But then I felt something move under the skin on my back again. I was so terrified. I had no choice but to agree. After that, a satisfied Graham stood up and told me to follow her. We came to the outskirts to her dilapidated house. I followed Graham cautiously, and she immediately grabbed my arm and dragged me into the basement. I tried to resist, but she pushed me into the darkness and slammed the door. I banged on it, and even tried to pretend that I was suffocating from claustrophobia. But Graham didn't fall for it. Suddenly, something rustled in the corner. I asked in horror, "Who's here?" A huge fat hand came out of the darkness. At that moment, Graham, through the door, told me to strangle this hand immediately. What? It's a living thing. Then Graham slyly remarked that I had promised her that I would do anything if I wanted to be cured. She paused, and I looked at the poor hand and held out my trembling hands. But at that moment, something moved on the floor and began to approach me. And I saw hordes of cockroaches. They began to crawl out of woodwork. I ran and started pounding on the door. I felt like they were really climbing up my legs. But at last, the door opened, and I, not understanding anything, flew out of this damned house and ran as fast as I could. I went home and tried to forget everything. Maybe it was just a bad dream. I tried to calm down, but at night, it seemed to me that cockroaches were crawling under my skin. I couldn't even close my eyes. It seemed I was starting to go crazy. Barely waiting for the morning, I crawled exhausted to Graham's house and began to knock on the door. Graham opened it, but as soon as she saw me on the threshold, she was about to slam the door. I got down on my knees and begged her to take the curse off me, and I even started crying. But Graham dryly ordered me to drop the act and said that she would give me another chance, but she demanded all my money for it. I was ready to do anything. I was bitter, but I took the phone and immediately transferred everything from my card to her and pulled out everything that was in my pockets. Graham smiled haughtily and told me to go to the cemetery at night and dig up a skeleton hand from the oldest grave. I wanted to ask how I could find the grave, but Graham slammed the door on me. It was getting dark and I was afraid to go to the cemetery, but I had to pull myself together. I need to break the curse or I'll just go crazy. The cemetery was dead silent. I carefully lit my way with a flashlight and moved along the path with a shovel. Suddenly, there was a loud crack. My heart sank and I hid behind some tombstone. These were steps. The sound was getting closer. With horror, I looked out and immediately exhaled. It was the watchman who was inspecting the territory. I waited until he was out of sight. Where was this ancient grave? The oppressive silence was unbearable. Just yesterday, I was fooling people with ease and fun, and today, I was without money, in a cemetery, and with cockroaches under my skin. Then I carefully looked at the tombstone behind which I was hiding. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it at the tombstone, and damn, the 17th century, the most ancient grave. I started digging it up. Suddenly, someone put a cold hand on my shoulder. I screamed and ran as fast as I could. I ran to the witch in the early morning. My skin itched even more, and I could hardly breathe. Graham saw that I came without the skeleton's hand and said in disappointment, "One day left. You won't make it. The cockroaches will eat you." And then it just poured out. I can't remember the last time I cried like that. But the witch told me not to scream. She gave me one last chance. I needed to take the pendant from one evil witch, Terry, who had the audacity to rob Graham. There was no choice. I didn't even ask anything. The cockroaches were just crawling under my skin. Where to go? I asked. At least the witch Terry lived nearby, and I went straight to her house. I carefully walked over to the partially open window and peered inside. That old Terry was snoring on the bed, surrounded by a lot of cats. God, how fat and disgusting she was. Graham said the pendant was hidden in the dressing room next to her bedroom. My heart was pounding. The main thing was not to get caught. I carefully climbed through the window into the bedroom. As I went down, the floor creaked treacherously, and then Terry stared in her bed. Was she awake? But no, Terry just turned over on the other side. I walked around a couple of cats and crept into the dressing room, where there were a lot of boxes and chests. Where was the pendant? I began quietly rummaging through the witch's junk. I finally found it, hanging on the altar by the mirror. The pendant was made of pure gold and shaped like a skull, with huge diamonds in its eyes. I put it in my pocket. Got it. I was about to leave the dressing room when I heard the cat's loud scream. I stepped on the tail of one of them. I immediately ran down to the hall to the front door. I had my hand on the handle. But then the old woman screamed, and she pushed me, and I hit my forehead right on the door with all my strength. And then everything was a blur. I woke up because the policeman was patting my cheeks. I looked around, and Terry was standing there, looking sullen and disheveled. I immediately backed away from her, begged her not to cast a spell on me, and told her about Graham's curse. The cops looked at me like I was a psychopath, and Terry said I was a liar, and that Graham, her sister, con artist, had just dispatched me. She was wanted, and it was not the first time she tried to steal this pendant, because it was very expensive and was inherited by Terry from their grandmother. Terry asked the cops to take me to the station as Graham's accomplice. I swore I didn't know anything, but the cops grabbed me away and took me away. I sat in the cell and grieved. So Graham wasn't a witch, and I, a first-class fraudster, was a victim of a scam myself. I almost cried. Was I really going to jail? And the cockroaches did not go anywhere. The whole body itched terribly. Suddenly, Graham was brought into the cell in handcuffs. The guard wanted to slam the door, but Graham snapped her fingers in his face. His eyes glared over, and he immediately removed the handcuffs first from Graham and then from me, and just turned his face to the wall. Graham was about to make a dash for the exit, but I caught her and pinned her against the bars. "You're not going anywhere until you tell me how to get the cockroaches out from under my skin." Then Graham laughed. She just wanted to teach a cheeky young con artist like me a lesson, and there were no cockroaches. It was just an allergy to the powder she blew in my face, and the usual allergy pills would quickly remove the itch. So I was not sick. I was about to tear Graham apart on the spot, but then I heard voices. The police were approaching. Graham tugged at my sleeve and dragged me out of the station. Graham and I ran out and disappeared, and when we stopped, I asked why the guard had let us go. She said she was a hypnotist, and it worked with the guard. Then Graham said that she liked me and offered to run away from the city to cheat with her. We would make a lot of money together, and we would live like queens. Graham offered everything I'd wanted for so long, but then, seeing her hands scratched till they bled, I remember how I had lived in fear these days. An image of my mom popped into my head. She wanted me to be a happy and honest person, and this was what the fraud led to me. I turned and left without answering Graham. I had a new life ahead of me, though not an easy one, but an honest one. Right, Mom? My new boyfriend Jake called me for breakfast, and I went downstairs. But as soon as I entered the kitchen, I was dumbfounded. A huge black shepherd dog was standing next to Jake. It was baring its teeth and growling. I only moved in yesterday, and before that, he didn't say he had a dog. My stomach clenched with fright. As a child, I was bitten by a stray dog, and I was treated for a whole month. Since that day, I've been terrified of dogs. But Jake smiled and said it was just Buddy, his favorite. I just nodded, trying not to shake. After all, if I told the truth, Jake might think I was a problem and throw me out. And going back to my parents was not an option. My mom and dad are violent alcoholics, and therefore it was simply unbearable to be at home. I had long wanted to move out of their house, but I didn't have the money to do it. So when Jake showed up at the bar yesterday and asked me to move in with him after 2 hours of conversation, I immediately agreed. It was my chance to escape from my parents. But this terrible dog, how will I live here? The dog stopped growling and sat down next to Jake. All through breakfast, I thought he was going to attack me. I couldn't eat a single bite. I was still hungry. But at lunchtime, Jake brought a tray of food to my room. How thoughtful he was. He said I'd like it because it was a special sandwich, his mom's recipe. He also added that he had released the shepherd into the yard and now it was time for him to run to work. But he walked all day and didn't come back until late in the afternoon. I was glad that I would be able to rest without this terrible dog. When Jake left, I decided to clean up the house, and in the evening, in the wardrobe, I came across a box marked personal. Well, that's interesting. I couldn't resist opening it to see if there were pictures of Jake as a child. But inside was old women's clothing. What kind of nonsense? Why did he keep such things here? Suddenly I started. Someone was scratching at the door. This terrible dog wanted to go home. I shoved the box back in, but I was afraid to let the dog in. What if he bit me? Fortunately, the sound soon subsided. Then I cautiously went to the window to find out where the dog had gone. And suddenly the shepherd dog jumped right at me, barking. Oh dear, Jake did close the window. I barely dodged and fell to the floor. My god, he was going to eat me up. In a panic, I jumped up and ran for the exit, but the mad thing was not far behind. His black fur stood on end, and his eyes were bloodshot. He wanted to tear me to pieces. And then I saw Jake standing in the doorway. Thank God. The shepherd immediately stretched out in front of the owner as if he did not want to touch me. But I decided that had enough. I began to say that this wild dog chased me all over the house. I miraculously survived. Jake gave me a gentle hug and began to soothe me. He said that he would definitely come up with something so that I would not worry so much anymore. The next day, Jake took his buddy to a zoo psychologist. He said that he would correct his behavior in a couple of days. Thank God, we could finally be alone together without this monster. In the evening, we watched a romantic movie, but something was bothering me. That's right, that weird box in the closet. I wondered why Jake needed those old women's things. All of a sudden, Jake was yelling at me to stay out of the way. I was taken aback. Why was he so turned on? Then Jake seemed to come to his senses. He took my hand and painfully told me that these were his dead mom's things. She passed away recently and it was hard for him to talk about it. I tried to comfort Jake as best as I could, but the evening was ruined. Jake said he wanted to be alone and went to the basement for some reason. I never knew what he was doing there, but he came back late. And when I woke up, Jake was gone. Strange. Where did he go on the weekend? Jake hadn't shown up all day. And I was really scared. What if something had happened to him? I was about to call the police when the phone rang in the house. I didn't dare answer, but after a few rings, the answering machine came on. Jake, this is your mother. Where the hell are you? My stomach turned cold. What? Mother? But Jake said she was dead. I was terrified, but I quickly pulled myself together. I didn't believe in mysticism, so I don't think it was a call from the other world. And then I realized that Jake didn't want to tell me the truth about those women's things. He was hiding something. I decided to sort it out and went to the living room. I opened the same wardrobe, but the box seemed to have disappeared. Then it was like a nightmare. I heard the shepherd barking again. My God, did he run away from the zoo psychologist? And then there was a strange sound under the windows, as if someone was digging the ground. I looked out, and I saw this disgusting dog trying to get into the basement. In a panic, I rushed downstairs. I needed to close the basement window quickly so that the dog did not get in. But the dog was already there, and noticing me, he slowly approached me. Saliva dripped from his fangs. He was about to bite me. But suddenly the dog took me by the sleeve and began to pull me somewhere. I had no choice but to follow him, my legs stiff with fear. The dog shoved his face into the dusty wardrobe and stood waiting. I carefully opened the doors and saw there a bound girl. There were bruises and abrasions on her body. God, this is terrible. I couldn't believe it. I quickly untied her and asked her what was wrong. The girl's name was Maggie. After recovering from the shock, she revealed that she had met Jake at a cafe a week ago. He quickly offered to move in with him, and she agreed as she needed an apartment. I shuddered. I had everything exactly the same. But the day after they moved in, Maggie realized that Jake wasn't himself. It was as if he snapped and he kept repeating the phrase, "Mom, I didn't do it." Maggie tried to run away from him, but Jake tied her up and locked her in the basement. Maggie's story stunned me. Turned out Jake was a psycho? How could I have missed it? I saw how strangely he reacted to that box. I quickly explained to Maggie that we had to run. Jake might be back any minute. We rushed to the door, but suddenly the road was blocked. It was Jake. We didn't have time. He glanced quickly at Maggie and understood. Well, you'll have company now. He smiled at her madly. Then Jake pulled a rope from behind his back and grabbed us. We tried to fight back, but he still tied us up. After that, Jake said he'd be back soon and punish us. You were very bad. My mother would not approve of that. He whispered ominously. I was shaking with fear. And then I heard a noise at the closet. It was Buddy. He had been hiding under the wardrobe all this time. He crawled out of his hiding place and tried to bite through the ropes. Well done, Buddy, I said, patting him behind the ear. Well, that was not as scary as I thought. Buddy couldn't do it. The ropes were very thick, but after 10 minutes, he finally freed us. Then we heard Jake's footsteps. Panicked, I looked around. The only way to escape was through the window, but it was so high. I somehow got Maggie up and she tried to pull me up, but she didn't have the strength. What to do? I couldn't jump high enough. I tried to find a chair or a box, but there was nothing, and then Buddy ran up to me. He offered his back and I was able to get out. At the same time, Jake burst into the basement. He was furious. We ran away from the house as fast as we could. I was hoping we'd get away in time. But then I saw Jake run out of the entrance and give chase. Damn it. The police station was only a block away. Maggie and I ran as fast as we could, but Jake was running after us, shouting wildly. He was right next to me, and he was grabbing my arm when suddenly Buddy jumped on him. It turned out that he was also running after us. The dog defended us bravely, but Jake threw him aside. He hit the ground hard and whined. But Buddy distracted Jake and I managed to push the trash cans on him. While Jake was recovering, Maggie ran into the station. But I couldn't leave Buddy. He'd saved my life. The dog barely moved, so I had to carry him. At the station, we immediately told the officer about everything and Jake was detained. We later found out that his mother was mentally ill and kept telling Jake that he was responsible for his sister's death. So Jake could not stand it and went crazy. Buddy was taken to the clinic. That crazy Jake broke some of his ribs. I was amazed at the courage of the dog. He was not afraid to attack the owner to save us. Tears welled up in my eyes. Maggie tried to calm me down. She said that he would soon be cured and put in a good shelter. But I couldn't even think about it. What if he's not well there? After the testimony, Maggie stayed at the station to wait for her relatives. I immediately went to see Buddy in the hospital. It was painful to look at him. He could hardly breathe in tears. I begged the doctor to cure Buddy. Dr. Steve promised to do everything possible, but warned that the damage was serious. I think I had nowhere to live again, and it was a good thing Maggie had let me stay with her. I went to the clinic every day to try to take care of Buddy, but he was still unconscious. Doc Steve was very supportive and told me that Buddy was going to get better. But one day, Steve came with bad news. The other doctors gathered a council and decided that Buddy was very ill and needed to be put down. Steve could not convince them. I burst into tears. I was terribly attached to Buddy during this time. In desperation, I burrowed into his thick fur. "Please, Buddy, come to your senses. I love you so much," I whispered. And then I felt something hit me gently on the back. It was Buddy. He opened his eyes and was wagging his tail. I hugged him overjoyed. The power of love is capable of many things. I heard Steve's voice behind me. A few days later, Buddy and I arrived at Maggie's house. She didn't mind that we would now live with our savior. Steve often called, asking about Buddy's condition, and one day, he even asked me out on a date. I agreed, but I took Buddy with me because he was a great judge of character. It's still a good idea to get to know someone better before you start dating them. I turned to the mirror and didn't recognize myself in reflection. There was a huge scar all over my face. It was convex and vile. I was a real freak, so no guy could like me. Thank God that scar is fake. I'm participating in an experiment from one fashion magazine. The goal is to see if I can find a boyfriend with such an ugly scar on my face in 3 days. If I manage, I'll get paid $1,000. My family was poor, and I couldn't dress cool and buy modern gadgets like everyone's. I felt a little outcast because of that. It's so humiliating being a beggar. I'll be beautiful, so I really needed that money. The curator forbade any way to insinuate that my scar was fake. If it popped up, then I definitely would never get the money. And every 3 hours, I had to send them my pics to chat so they make sure the scar was intact. But the thing was that I cheated the curators from the beginning. I have got a boyfriend, so it's sure to be easy money. I'm confident in my boyfriend, Zach. He always said he would love me no matter what. I went to school, and everyone of course began to look back at me. Zach stood near the biology office and chatted animatedly with friends. "Zach, I'm here." Seeing me, he staggered off. I lied that I had an accident, and I said I loved him very much. But Zach replied with abomination that he couldn't date such a freak and just walked away. What? How? But he told me he would always be around. I had a hard time sitting out my lesson. But then I ran to the toilet. I wanted to get this makeup off sooner. And then I heard some girls whispering next to the stall. One of them said handsome Zach had finally dumped that freak and had already asked the main cheerleader out on a date. I was so bitter and resentful, but Zach would yet regret abandoning me. I came out of the toilet and confidently went to the gym. There was usually rugby team captain Chris practicing. He and Zach had long been at odds. I will win Chris, get money for the experiment, and at the same time, take revenge on Zach dating with his arch enemy. I walked up to Chris and immediately started flirting. That's what I knew. But he just rolled with laughter. He said that I was a beggar woman, and now with an ugly scar. What a jerk. I wanted to leave and push Chris, but he cornered me and started taking photos of me on the phone. Get off, Chris. That's enough. But he held me so tight that I couldn't even run away. But suddenly someone called out to Chris. That was the nerd from my class, Cody. He said the coach was looking for Chris everywhere. He let me go and quickly left. And I told the nerd Cody that I would have managed myself. Cody immediately apologized and said he just wanted to help and then offered a ride to the house. I didn't want to be seen with this loser. But I didn't seem to mind a car ride. And then it turned out he had a stupid bicycle. While we were on the way, I burned with shame, but it was better than listening to the chuckles of passengers on the bus. And Cody looked at me that and then. "What are you looking at, loser?" And then I thought, Cody was perfect for the experiment. I will quickly fascinate this muff and show the curators that I still found a guy. So when we drove up to my house, I asked him out on a romantic date in gratitude for the rescue. But Cody suddenly hesitated and said abruptly he was very busy in the evening and immediately left. I didn't believe my eyes. Did he just reject me? Damn. And I have little time until the end of the experiment. The next day at school was even worse. Everyone at school knew about my ugliness and called me names. And Zach began to avoid me and even hit a couple of times. But that's okay. I'll survive it. Now my goal is the nerd Cody. So I threw a nice note with 2 tickets to the cinema in his locker and wrote that I would wait for him after the lessons at the black door. As soon as the bell rang, I headed eagerly there. Cody will be mine. But local hooligans were standing there instead of Cody. They quickly looked over and the man ripped my backpack out of my hands. I tried to resist, but they grabbed me and held me while their ringleader searched for money in my backpack. And when he realized that there was nothing, he aimed it at a tree. Then I stepped on one guy's foot with all my strength and broke free. I wanted to take away my backpack, but I hurt my leg and bashed straight into the puddle. The guys only laughed loudly. When suddenly Cody appeared out of now here again. He so deftly knocked down the ringleader that the others immediately ran away. "Look at you, nerd!" He lifted me out of the dirt, took my backpack, and helped get to the bicycle. I asked him where he had learned this, to which he said he had once done karate. We were already late for the movie, so Cody offered to go home. This time I did mind. I even liked yesterday's bike ride. At home, Cody made me a compress, from which the pain in my legs subsided. This was the perfect moment to get closer. I had already bent over to kiss him, but suddenly Cody pulled away and asked, where did I get that scar from? Was he dumping me again? And then Cody looked at me with sympathy and admitted that he understood what it was like to have a defect on the body, like no one else. "What are you about?" At this point, Cody unbuttoned his shirt and showed me a huge, ugly scar on his chest. I hadn't seen such in my life. It turned out that as a child, Cody underwent severe heart surgery, but the scar never went away. He was constantly bullied, and because of this, he even neglected his favorite occupation, swimming. Now he even did go to the beach so as not to undress. I suddenly became so embarrassed. I had only been scarred for 2 days, but I was really sick of the jeers. And the scar was fake, all for money. But for Cody, this was a real problem. At this moment, I received a reminder from the curator. Hurry up, there are only 2 days left. I realized there was an urgent need to act and invited Cody to the beach. When he saw me in a bikini, he would immediately agree to be my boyfriend. I began to say that scars should not prevent us from doing what we like, and that if I could walk around with a scar on my face, Cody should stop being shy too. I was scared that he would refuse me, but Cody said he had to think and would give an answer late in the evening. If he refuses, I won't get the money and everything was for nothing. So I was on edge all the evening. But suddenly a text came to me from Cody. He said he thought this through and would pick me up in the morning. The last day of experiment came in the morning and Cody and I went to the beach. There I began to strip to the swimsuit. Cody kept looking around and seemed very tense. I took his hand and said it wasn't as scary as he thought. He just had to decide once. Cody agreed and took off his shirt, but still tried to cover the scar with his hand. And that's where the ball came under our feet. It was Chris with his guys. They began to laugh at us and call us freaks from the Addams family. Cody immediately blushed, but I strongly took his hand. Let's go swimming, away from these dorks. We entered the water. Cody was delighted. It turned out he missed swimming a lot. We swam to a rock nearby that hid us from everywhere. Our eyes met, and Cody hesitatingly said he was in love with me in middle school. I did not expect this. He came close to kissing me, and I realized I didn't mind. But suddenly Cody changed in his face. Cody, what happened? I touched my scar, and I realized that silicone had peeled off the skin. I tried to stick it back, but it got worse. The scar just fell off my face. Oh no, I tried to explain to Cody about the experiment, but he didn't want to listen. He said he understood everything. I was with these rugby players and just wanted to expose him as an idiot. He immediately ran ashore and quickly left. Cody, wait! I came ashore and burst into tears at the understanding that Cody was the only one who treated me well. Even despite the scar and poverty, I messed it up. But at the same minute, the curator called via video link to find out the progress with the completion of the experiment and saw that there was no scar left. That's when the curator stated that they were depriving me of a cash prize. The experiment failed, but I didn't care. I cried for an hour and then headed home. And when I slammed the front door, someone knocked on it. It was Cody. He was probably following me. But Zach was on the doorstep, my ex. He quickly began to assure that he realized everything. I was the most beautiful girl in the world. I just had to tell him about the makeup right away. But I just slammed the door in front of Zach. I was very angry at this hypocrite and didn't want to listen to his apology. Then I decided that tomorrow I would apologize to Cody. He was now more important to me than any gadgets and money. In the morning, at school, I started looking for Cody. He sat in the dining room. I sat down nearby and started apologizing. It was all a terrible mistake, but Cody ignored me and headed for the exit. I didn't know what to do. In the meantime, I noticed how other guys were looking at me with sympathy. Screw you all. I only need Cody. Then I climbed on the table, called him loudly, and in front of everyone admitted that he was the best person I had ever met. I wanted to be with him, and I apologized for deceiving him. But Cody didn't even turn around. Was he gone and we would never be able to communicate again for the first time? I felt what it means when you lose a dear person. How suddenly Cody, pushing the crowd aside, climbed on the table and kissed me. Everyone around clapped and loved. I put my hand on Cody's chest and felt the scars, and suddenly I realized that the heart of an incredibly beautiful person was beating behind them. I whispered, "It doesn't matter what you have outside and what you look like. The main thing is what a soul you have." At the same moment, I received a text from the curator about a new experiment. I need to spend a year in a relationship without quarrels. I agreed and thought, what if Cody and I could live like this all our life?